So, I'm doing my regular check on my analytics in the YouTube app because I am a simp for the algorithm. And I noticed that a video of mine has gotten a sudden big boost in views. It's my male desirability video, which was a pretty successful video that had long since hit its natural heat death on YouTube and wasn't getting more than a few hundred views a day, but suddenly it shot up to a few thousand views in one day, which usually means that something happened to drive traffic towards it. And that usually means that a big channel posted it or said something about it. And after a little investigation, I find out that of all people, my video was momentarily posted in the description for Shoe on Head's recent video about how the left has failed men, or at least it was for about a day. And then I assume someone pointed out to Shoe that I'm not a fan of her or that particular space of the online left, and she likely removed it from her description. No hard feelings, because to be honest, she's better than me to have ever posted it in the first place if I'm going to keep it a buck. That said, it got me to watch her video, and it's not the worst video of its kind. My problems with that space aside, because we are talking about Shoe on Head, I thought she brought up a few really good and important points that I had personally been struggling to kind of like articulate into a take on this issue that keeps coming up over and over and over again about how the left is failing men. And having watched her video, I want to take a few whacks at this dead horse to share some thoughts. So Shoe's video is basically just her reacting to mean tweets from online leftists. From what I can gather, most of the tweets are in response to a relatively bad take from a perpetual line stepper of the dirtbag left, whose name I won't say lest I invoke the plague of his fan base. But there's some important stuff to chew on from that section of the video. But first, I want to talk about this table. If you're online in these spaces, then I'm sure you saw this image circulate a ton a few weeks ago, because this image got so much of the online left in a tizzy. Now, nigga like me, instead of panicking like many others did about this table, I decided to use that 75% of my PhD training that I finished to do a little research and understand the context of what this table actually measured and how. This table is based off data from the Monitoring the Future survey, an annual survey out of the University of Michigan that is designed specifically for examining the attitudes of drug use in American high school students that's actually been going on since the 1970s. The table is pulled from one specific question that asks explicitly what political identity 12th grade high school boys identify with. And at least in the binary sense of how this specific table is presented, it draws a pretty stark image of where things currently stand and where they may go in the future. If you look at it in isolation, you might understand why so many people would be bothered by the reality that this table presents. However, if you know anything about research and data, you know that real data do not look like this. They look like this. And trust, I am far from a true data scientist, and quantitative research was not my bag, but I'm smart enough to know that with enough intention or skill, one can use data to say just about anything. For example, I was able to find the original Excel data sheet for the 2021 version of the study. So I want to be clear, this is not the data that represents the table, but again, you'll understand if you understand data. This chart is from a single sample of around 7,000 male students, which is a great sample size. But in total, this chart, this table that's been circulating our online spaces, only represents 36% of the responses of the entire sample. When you look at the 2021 data and zoom out on the findings from this one question, you find that by far the most common response for this question was, "I don't know," followed by "moderate." These responses total around 60% of the same sample in 2021. And again, from 2021 to 2022, we can see that the amount of boys calling themselves conservatives greatly decreased. So a more accurate representation of the data from this question should actually read 60% of high school teenagers don't know shit about politics, which, duh. More significantly is that this is all coming from one question of self-identification, not actual questions that engage the principles of these different ideologies. It is a well-worn trope that if you actually sit so-called conservatives down and ask them about what they believe from a policy standpoint, they always end up supporting more left-leaning policies. Conservatism is more of an identity at this point than real political movement. I mean, right now, any conservatives watching, tell me, What explicit government policies do current conservatives actually stand for as opposed to against? We know conservatives are against trans people. We know conservatives are against black people and critical race theory, are against social safety net programs and against abortion. But for, I guess you all are for police, but we still actually know what that's really about. Lastly, with studies like this, you have to consider what might be called confounding factors of the research. Specifically, in the last few years, what might provide even more context to these data? The biggest jump in conservative ideology in this table happens between 2019 and 2020. You want to guess what major social political issue happened at that time that has hyper-politicized pretty much everything in the world? Also, I couldn't, or to be honest, didn't bother to find out more about the sample selection process, but from what I saw, it did seem like there was an effort to make race and ethnicity proportional to America's racial demographics, but I don't know where these samples came from. Did they only come from red states or blue states, middle class, urban, rural, or suburban areas? If you understand how social research works, which, let's keep it a buck, a lot of the big brains in this space don't, then you know to never look at a table like this in isolation and let it be the end-all be-all on any topic. Now, many of you know that I hold the belief that even moderates and centrists are right-wing in America or conservative, so that still shows us that we have a problem from my perspective. But overall, when you take a more informed look at these data, it doesn't really seem to require the reaction that it's been getting from the online left. This is really just how things have always been. Men have always been a certain amount more conservative than women. That's kind of how patriarchy works. And the opposing graph also shows this. In fact, further analysis shows that girls of the same age group are becoming even more liberal than boys are becoming conservative, which is overall skewing the total of Gen Z and beyond's political identity, which matches the political identity of age millennials such as myself, who are also much further left as a group than generations before us. So essentially, if you're looking at this table as an evidence of a W or an L, it's still kind of a W. And all evidence of the political reality for younger Americans also looks like W's. But I hate that I'm even using that language to describe this situation. Let me come back to Shoe on Head for a second and hold my nose as I give her a few more flowers for what I think was a very good observation on the inherent stupidity and faultiness of this ongoing discourse.
It's always framed around, how do we get them? As if men are just pawns and tools for your personal politics. How do we make the left more appealing to men? How do we stop lonely men from moving to Andrew Tate? Instead of just, how do we help men?
If there's one thing that annoys me about the body politic of much of the online left, it's how myopic the community can be, and how all of that clouds so much of its activity or lack thereof and limits its potential. So much of the online left is couched in what I call dunk contest politics, where they're so involved in the proxy fights between online personalities or on message boards and social media, or arguing, I don't know, with their conservative uncles or parents or college roommates, that they see this as some type of online popularity contest instead of a political movement. And I say this as a fan of many a debunked video. I'm not saying that you should only care about praxis and never engage in discussions or debate, but if to you the curtain call for the left was this table, you should probably touch grass. That said, let me entertain this specific issue for a bit and say that the left's biggest need was to recruit people for your favorite Reddit page, and you are frustrated by the lack of growth and movement in the left and your favorite influencers subscription panel in comparison to right-wing and Manosphere figures, and you see the spread of certain images and ideas and feel like the left hasn't responded effectively. Let's just for a minute take that completely seriously. For those of you in my audience who don't know, especially here on the B-Sides channel, where my audience is definitely blacker and less chronically online, there has been an ongoing discussion about the state of men and masculinity online. This discourse has become more prominent in the last probably 4 or 5 years with the rise, and many would say fall, of guys like Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate, Kevin Samuels, etc. And while it's obvious to anyone with critical faculties that these men's popularity is due to their right-wing, reactionary, and misogynistic utility, many of their diehard fans will say it's because they are pro-men. I won't bother to explain, again, why all of that is bullshit. I'll just put some good videos explaining that in the description. What I want to do is discuss why, even if that were true, it would still not be a big deal, because it's just history repeating itself. Quiet as it's kept, the Manosphere has always been around in various ways online, and these types of chauvinistic figures are not new. Going back to the 70s, there were men's empowerment seminars with Andrew Tates of that era shouting at men about how hard they need to work to be real men and how bad women are, and bad women are stopping them from being real men.
Over all of these years, a lot of times, the feminists have stood up and taken just a nice little dropper of poison and put it into the pool of rhetoric. What I'm concerned about is that as a nation, as a culture, we are literally swallowing these images of men and women.
And the Red Pill podcasts of today owe much of their aesthetics and energy to the Howard Stern shock jock era of the 90s and early 2000s, where you had The Guy Show and Girls Gone Wild and Tucker Max books. A lot of you are too young to remember this stuff. The hustle culture scam artists have been preying on the economic anxiety of the poor and petite bourgeois men of America for as long as I can remember. None of this is new, it's just more visible. But since so much of the online left is barely old enough to rent a car, I can understand why this feels like some big new existential threat to the left or reality as a whole. Now, all jokes aside, the scale of the phenomenon is new and definitely presenting a greater challenge than before. But the answer is not left-wing Andrew Tate. And to again give Shu her credit, she astutely points out that left-leaning thinkers cannot easily mimic the type of hierarchical dominance-based personas of an Andrew Tate or Jordan Peterson. That type of posturing is antithetical to almost every permutation of leftist ideology one might think of. And if you think that left-wing Andrew Tate is a real solution to this challenge, you might want to consider whether or not you're actually here for leftist movements or to win an argument against your shitty uncle or asshole roommate. I often hear things like, at least the right is trying to talk to men, which is, again, just not true and reveals the shallowness of so many people involved in this conversation. There are now so many left-leaning content creators engaging in the topic of masculinity on the regular, not just debunking right-wing talking points, but engaging in productive and helpful discussions about masculinity and men's issues. And while surely it's not perfect, it's there. There is no vacuum or lack of effort at this point. There is only a lack of algorithmic viability. One thing that is never discussed in this conversation is how the only real new factor to this problem is the role that the medium of communication plays in all of this. Going back to Andrew Tate, do you know that at the height of his reign of terror, he didn't even really have any social media? He didn't have a YouTube channel or a TikTok channel. Yet he was being proliferated heavily through those mediums and all of social media. I'll give Tate this. The man is a masterful manipulator. Instead of posting his own produced content, Tate would just go on other people's podcasts and do interviews and say the most ridiculous and deranged things. Then, as a part of his now defunct Hustlers University, he would employ an army of independent channels to share clips of his content while giving him a cut. I'll leave a video that explains it all, but the end result was him all over the internet with no singular source for where it was actually coming from. And because he was so ridiculous, people would watch and share, even if it was just to say, look at this buffoon, I can't believe he's saying something so stupid, which a lot of his viewers are doing. But these algorithms that control the proliferation of his content don't have a conscience or moral compass. All they will see in that situation is engagement. And of course it's engagement, because Tate is targeting one of the largest populations of consumers on the internet, young men. Young men brought up under patriarchy who are definitely preconditioned, you might even say groomed, to see the antics of Andrew Tate as aspirational and lacking the life experience to realize that he's an idiot. Not unintelligent, but still an idiot. Right now, if you're a teenage boy, you probably can't open up TikTok without seeing some type of red pill content. It's everywhere and it's being pushed by these mediums. It's the same thing that happened in the post-Gamergate era with the alt-right. Young men get inundated with these images and messages and it becomes reality to them until they have the opportunity to snap out. I need you all to understand, please understand this. Putting content on the internet is not an equal footing zero-sum game. The fact that you are seeing this video now is a result of literally at this point for me, years of work and effort to build a platform where I can be seen by just a handful of people that are watching. I will never do numbers like an Andrew Tate or a Jordan Peterson or even a Shoe on Head because the algorithm does not really help amplify the type of content that I'm making. But if I got up here and talked bad about women, especially black women, and did a bunch of goofy red pill shit, you best believe that the algorithm would send me everywhere I've ever wanted to go. You're not seeing a lack of effort as it pertains to men from the online left. What you're seeing is the result of capitalist algorithms serving the bottom line of engagement versus actually spreading good ideas. But that's only really part of the discussion. If you ask me, what I think Shu gets at in her video is that the real issue that keeps forcing this conversation to the forefront of a specific portion of the online left is that the left is just too mean to men. When I see videos like Shu and the proliferation of that graph and cries for the leftist Andrew Tate, what I really think we're dealing with is a lot of male ostensible leftists dealing with the growing pains of accountability and struggling with self-reflection and change. Even though I enjoy a lot of debunk and dunk content, I want to be clear, the dunk contest politics of the online left have incentivized what is to me very reactionary behavior from ostensible leftists. As I said earlier, Shu's video is 50% mean tweets responding to a particularly toxic figure of the online left whose behavior constantly engenders these types of responses. But even though I completely empathize with the sentiment of wanting to shout down certain people, what's inarguable is the poor analysis and understanding of certain politics and the ideologies presented in some of those responses. I'm gonna be blunt. There's a lot of online feminists whose core academic background comes from the University of Tumblr. There are too many feminists online who spell bell hooks' name with capital letters, and it shows. And ironically, the same algorithm that feeds us tons of Andrew Tate amplifies many of these masculinity hot takes, which become lightning rods for Twitter arguments and muddies the water of the overall discussion. There is, some of y'all are not gonna like me saying this, but there is a very weak understanding of feminism as it relates to masculinity in the online left, and I have seen it not just in responses to debate bros, but with Khadijah Mbo, Kim Foster, Ali Sunvia, and others that get unfairly criticized and drugged by their own audiences for doing real intersectional feminism and trying to explain why men bad feminism is at its core reactionary. You may not think misandry is a thing, and I'm not sure if I like the term because of its loaded history. But if you think men created patriarchy, like we had a meeting and decided to inject ourselves with the patriarchy virus to rule the world, but also die at an earlier age, you need to do some reading and processing on what role you're playing in these politics. I don't think everyone is built for every conversation, and if you don't have the energy or capacity to engage with men as anything other than an adversarial group, I respect it if you protect yourself in that regard, but that also means you might want to check out of the conversation as a whole until you have the capacity to participate in it productively. At the same time, the cries of, "Why the feminists are so mean," doesn't move me much. Men in this space, adjacent to this space, and in opposition to this space are harmful to the space. For all the smoke I just gave pop girl boss feminism in this video, and for all the advocacy I do for men in my content, I've never felt like anyone was mean to me. The truth is that so many men want access to the space and the perception of being one of the good ones without doing the prerequisite work. And then when people in those communities set boundaries and avoid certain figures, they're labeled woke skulls. You are not entitled to community. You do not get to label yourself as one of the good ones, and neither of those things should be your goal in these politics. And if you really were doing the work, you would understand that to be the case. If tons of women, femmes, masks, trans, minorities, and other men are telling you that you or your fave are not acceptable to be in community with, either do the work to accomplish being worthy of that community, or be okay with making your own where you can be comfortable in whatever state you want to reside in. Mind you, I want to be clear, I'm not saying that the two fringe factions in this conflict are equal in their problems, just saying that the only real solution that I see is being okay with being separate overall communities and focusing on the work that is within your reach. Conservatives have one real tactical advantage that we are failing on, and that is that they always fall in line. I'm not saying that that's what we need to do specifically, but we can at least learn to conserve our energy for more important issues than stupid reactionary tweets. Speaking of major issues, there is one last point that Shu makes in passing that is really the real core of this whole what can the left do for men issue.
And the housing crisis and living in a country where the wealth inequality is worse than it was during the Gilded Age, that all happened recently. Because feeling alienated under capitalism apparently isn't a thing. People are working harder and longer while wages have been stagnant, men have been dropping out of college like flies, and what does that get you?
Masculinity has always been in a constant state of crisis. It's kind of a key ingredient to making the whole system work. However, it's not until the last few decades that you start to see so many of these proto-manosphere figures emerge. And even then, most were very niche and never able to get much footing on the pulse of men and boys. Most boys and men looked at these he-man, woman-hater figures in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s as weirdos and losers. But that was a different economic time where men who were feeling angsty about masculinity could at least grow into and access a level of economic and social viability that isn't available right now. For most of the last century, men could finish high school, find a trade, join a union, work a steady job with upward mobility, and feed an entire family off their salary while saving for retirement. But in the late 80s and early 90s, neoliberal politics emerged under the Reagan and Bush administration, which solidified in the NAFTA deal under Clinton, which opened up the world economy. But what that really means is that it became easier for corporations to find cheaper labor than what Americans are willing to take, resulting in the death of manufacturing and eventually the middle class as a whole. The things that men say they want, gainful employment, healthcare, the ability to take care of a family and be viable in the dating market, etc., don't exist for them in 2023 for that reason. Yet our rhetoric about what a real man is has not changed since the 1950s. And while we on the left are speaking to the truth of that reality, the Tates and Petersons of the world are spreading lies about the current state of affairs, saying that the reason men can't be loved and can't support a family is because women and feminism and trans people and critical race theory or whatever the fuck the thing they're talking about in the moment might be. But these are comforting and familiar lies that affirm the mythology of gender and capitalism that all men are groomed under. So it's easy to believe those lies. In 2018, when the CDC first released its findings on the longitudinal study of suicide in the US, it recognized that the key issue for most of the people suffering was a dissolvement of their lives economically and socially. They called them deaths of despair. They found that the core of the rise in suicide was connected to the loss in economic and social stability. A 2022 meta-study in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health said the following. The links between economic insecurity and worse mental health, including suicide rates, have been well known for a long time. The increase in economic insecurity in the USA, particularly in certain states, was strongly associated with job externalization, for example in Michigan, the 2007 to 2013 crisis, and more recently the COVID-19 pandemic. Burgeoning economic insecurity has led to an epidemic of depression and other mental health issues linked to a sharp increase in suicides and drug-related issues. What we're dealing with here is bigger than who made the biggest dunk on Andrew Tate or Ben Shapiro or whatever stupid tweet that insert person here said, or who got totally owned in the most recent debate. We're dealing with the very core of what leftist politics are about. Men are struggling because of capitalism. And Andrew Tate is successful because of capitalism. The left will not win by having its own Andrew Tate. It doesn't work like that. To quote a notable feminist that many of you have never read,
For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about real change.
What the left needs to do to help men is continue to fight against the capitalist structures that hurt everyone, including men. We need to promote social, political organizing and work to seize the levers of power and reverse the damage of these policies that have been in place for my entire life. If we really care about men, we'll be fighting to give them access to the tools through which they can live meaningful lives, not give them leftist pickup lines or ways to be a feminist, but also trick girls into having sex with you. So please, everyone, myself included, elevate your analysis. Get off Twitter if you know all you'll do is angry tweet. Stop sharing content that pisses you off and amplify the creators that you think are helpful and useful to men. And please, please, please touch grass regularly. I'm FD Signifier, and this may have been a little bit longer, but it was still light work.